The chill of the marble floor was the first thing I felt, a jolt that raced up my spine. A moment before I'd been the matriarch of the Bennett family, presiding over our Christmas dinner. The next I was flat on the ground, my 72-year-old body throbbing from the fall, staring at the merciless face of my own son. If you're listening to this, please like the video, subscribe and drop a comment about where you're tuning in from. His words cut through the stunned silence. This place belongs to my mother-in-law now. Get out. Just an hour earlier, our ranch outside Austin had been glowing with warmth and holiday charm. A towering pine tree sparkled with decades of ornaments, and the fire painted everyone's faces in golden light. The air carried the scent of turkey, cinnamon, and pine, everything that made home feel like Christmas. I'd spent the week preparing, my tired hands still finding joy in the kitchen, determined to make this day perfect for those I loved most. My grandkids Sophie and Ethan had helped decorate. Sophie, 16, carried her late grandfather George's thoughtful eyes, and Ethan, 13, was all heart, pure affection. They were my everything. My son Mark arrived with his wife Rachel and her mother Margaret. I hugged them, though Rachel's was stiff, her cheek cold. Margaret, polished as ever, offered her usual icy smile that never reached her eyes. We gathered in the dining room, where the long mahogany table gleamed beneath candlelight. For 40 years the chair at the head had been mine, the seat I'd shared with George, a symbol of what we'd built together. But as I moved to sit, Mark stopped me. His jaw was tight, Rachel's hand pressed into his arm, and Margaret sat nearby with unsettling calm. "That's Margaret's seat tonight," he said. I laughed softly, thinking he was joking. But his tone sharpened. "Things are changing. She's the senior woman here now. This house belongs to her." The words stung. Margaret smiled, thin and predatory. I reminded Mark this was my home. He cut me off, anger rising. "You're stuck in the past, Mom. It's time for new leadership in this family and in the company. It's my house now." "No," I whispered, fury steadying me. "Not until I'm dead." And then he shoved me. Not a nudge, a deliberate push, fueled by bitterness I hadn't seen coming. At my age it didn't take much. I lost my balance, crashing to the marble. My hips screamed with pain, glass shattering beside me like a gunshot. Silence smothered the room. "Grandma!" Ethan cried, rushing toward me. But my gaze locked on a blinking red light. Sophie, holding her new phone, had been recording, hoping to capture a joyful family dinner. Instead she'd filmed everything. Mark's cruel words, the shove, my fall, the triumphant smirks of Rachel and Margaret. On that screen, I saw the broken woman I'd become, the strangers my family had turned into, and the weapon they had just handed me. Betrayal doesn't erupt all at once. It grows slowly, like rot in the dark. Looking back, the signs were there, faint cracks I chose to ignore. A week earlier, while I was lost in holiday joy, their plan was already unfolding. The Austin air had been cool and festive, lights twinkling across the city. George had been gone 2 years, and though grief lingered, Sophie and Ethan's excitement kept me going. I spent an afternoon at Macy's hunting for gifts. For Sophie, I found a leather-bound first edition of her favorite novel. She had her grandfather's love for books. For Ethan, the choice was easy. The mountain bike he'd been dreaming about, chrome and black, fast as freedom. Just picturing his smile on Christmas morning had made me laugh out loud right there in the crowded store. I was lost in my preparations, blissfully unaware. In my mind, I saw us all at the ranch, unwrapping presents by the fire, safe and happy in the home George and I had built. I still pictured my son Mark as the boy with scraped knees, or the young man who once looked at me with such pride on his graduation day. I didn't realize that past no longer existed. While I was carefully picking wrapping paper, Mark was in a sleek downtown restaurant, selling me out over soup. It must have been one of Rachel's choices, all chrome and glass, the kind of place where deals happen. Mark sat there with her and Margaret, her mother, the real puppeteer in this story. They would have ordered a bottle of wine worth more than most families spend on groceries in a week. And Margaret, with her calm smile, would start planting her poison. "David, you know how much I admire your mother. She's one of the strongest women I've ever known." Pause, a smile. Then her tone shifting, soft but sharp. "But the business world isn't what she and George built. It's faster now, harsher. Her ideas, though good-hearted, are outdated." I imagine Mark squirmed, wanting to defend me. "Mom helped Dad build Bennett Construction from nothing," he might have said. That's when Rachel would have jumped in, her hand on his. Of course she did, honey. But that was then. Just last week she tried to earmark $1 million for an arts program, while competitors undercut us on the Houston contract. Margaret would nod gravely. It's not about the money, Mark, it's about focus. Your mother still treats the company like a family project. That's sweet but dangerous. You see the bigger picture. You're being held back. She knew exactly where to strike. Mark had lived all his life under George's towering shadow. He was never as driven, never as brilliant, and always carried that insecurity. Margaret's words pressed on that wound, promising him power and independence. It's your time now, she would whisper. Be strong. For Rachel, for your kids. Take what's rightfully yours. Rachel's eyes would harden. We need full control. No more running things by her. The image that haunts me most is the hesitation I imagine in Mark's eyes. A flicker where love for me fought against their poison. But it wasn't a fair fight. On one side, an aging mother. On the other, 2 women feeding his ego and dangling a crown. He looked at Margaret's serene smile, Rachel's hungry expression. And then he lifted his glass, gripped it tight, drank, and set it down with a sharp click. One nod. A silent agreement. The ambush was set. Meanwhile, miles away, I was happily buying a bicycle, clueless that my son had just chosen to push me out of my home, my company, my life. A few days before Christmas Eve, there was one last quiet dinner. Just me, Mark, and the kids. Rachel and Margaret were away at a spa retreat. What I now see was likely their final strategy session. At the time, I was just grateful for an evening with my son and grandkids, hoping to bridge the strange distance between us. I cooked his favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes and glazed carrots, thinking it might bring us closer again. I was a fool. It was the taste of Mark's childhood, that pot roast with mashed potatoes and carrots, a meal I hoped would remind him of simpler, happier times. We sat at the little round table in the breakfast nook, sunlight spilling across the ranch as the Texas sky turned orange and purple. For a short while it almost felt normal. Ethan chattered about basketball, Sophie shared her excitement over a photography project, and I watched Mark smile at them. My heart swelled, and for a moment I believed I saw the man I raised, the boy who once looked at me with pride. That fleeting glimpse gave me courage. Mark, I began, waiting for a pause. I had the most wonderful meeting today with the folks from the Children's Music Foundation. His smile faded. I pressed on, blind to the warning. They're giving instruments and lessons to kids right here in Austin. Their building is falling apart, and I thought Bennett Construction could help fund a new performance hall, the George Bennett Hall, in your father's honor. My eyes lit up at the vision. George always believed our wealth came with a duty to the community. This felt like continuing his soul's work. Mark set his fork down with a sharp clink. Mother, the company is not your personal charity. The coldness in his voice felt like a slap. I tried to explain the tax benefits, the good press, the rightness of it all. But he cut me off. I don't care what Dad would have wanted. I care about profit margins. We're fighting for the new airport expansion. Every dollar counts. We are not a foundation. We are a construction empire. Let me run it that way. The room froze. Ethan stared down at his plate, Sophie's worried eyes flicked between us. I tried to laugh it off. Of course, dear. I was only suggesting. He didn't soften. Then keep your suggestions to yourself. I'll handle the decisions from now on. I wanted to shout that I wasn't just another board member, that I was his mother and co-founder, that my instincts had saved George more than once. But looking at the kids' troubled faces, I swallowed my anger and simply nodded. The rest of dinner was agony, filled with hollow small talk while the roast tasted like ash. As I studied Mark, I saw how deep Rachel and Margaret's influence had sunk. His words weren't his own, they were echoes of their ambition. He sat in his father's chair wearing his father's suit, but he was a stranger to me now. The loving boy was gone, replaced by a man who looked at me with impatience as though I stood in his way. That night, for the first time, I understood. This wasn't rebellion or independence. It was erasure. The quiet dinner was only the tremor before the earthquake. The drive from the ranch into Austin toward Charles Bennett's office passed in a blur. The skyline, once a proud reminder of all George and I had built, now felt cold and foreign. Every skyscraper in Austin felt like a monument to the ruthless ambition that had taken my son. My hip ached, but it was nothing compared to the weight in my chest. Charles Bennett, George's best friend since boyhood, our family lawyer and executor of his will, welcomed me into his office. The mahogany walls, shelves of old law books, and faint smell of whiskey always gave me comfort. But that day his face was grave. He handed me a brandy and listened as I told him everything. The demand for my seat, Mark's cold words, the shove, the fall in front of my grandchildren. I spoke without tears, my grief hardened into something sharp. Charles wasn't surprised, which hurt the most. Finally he said, "George saw this coming. He prayed it wouldn't, but he knew Mark's weakness." He moved to a painting on the wall, swung it aside and opened a steel safe. From inside he pulled a thick envelope sealed with George's wax crest. "He left a special clause," Charles explained. "His poison pill. If Mark, as CEO and majority shareholder, ever subjects you to undeniable public humiliation, you gain the immediate right to purchase all his controlling shares, for $1. The audacity stole my breath. A masterstroke from George, but monstrous in its implications. "He wanted me to bankrupt my son?" I whispered. "No," Charles said gently. "He wanted you to have a choice. To never be at Mark's mercy, or at Rachel and Margaret's. It's a loaded gun, Margaret, meant only for when you have no other way out." The weight of it chilled me. To use it would mean war, the destruction of what family I had left. I recoiled until Charles asked, "Do you have proof?" My mind stilled and the image of Sophie's phone appeared as clear as glass. The blinking red light, Mark's hand shoving me, the fall, the shattered wine, Rachel's triumphant smirk. It wasn't just evidence. It was a verdict. I met Charles's eyes and the hesitation inside me burned away. What remained was something I hadn't felt in years. The cold fury of a woman finally armed to fight back. That memory still comes in fragments, sharp and cutting like broken glass. What haunts me most are the moments just before the fall, when the lines were drawn not with violence, but with whispers and smiles. I'd been standing by the fireplace talking with Ethan about his Christmas wish list, when Margaret made her entrance. She didn't just walk into the room, she arrived. In her emerald green velvet dress, elegant yet predatory, she took the air with her. Diamonds flashed at her throat and ears, cold, brilliant and hard. Margaret moved through the room not as a guest but like a queen taking possession. I smiled politely. "Margaret, you look stunning. Merry Christmas." "Margaret, dear," she purred, air kissing beside my cheek. "You've made everything so festive, so traditional." The faint condescension in that last word made my stomach tighten, but I ignored it. Instead of mingling, she glided straight to the dining room. I watched her survey the table I'd spent all afternoon setting. Then, with deliberate grace, she set her evening bag beside the chair to the right of the head, the seat of honor once reserved for George, and sat down, legs crossed, serene entitlement radiating from her. Everyone in the room felt the shift. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Even Ethan's chatter faded to silence. Margaret wasn't a guest anymore. She was staking a claim. Across the room, Rachel stood close to Mark, her crimson nails digging into his sleeve, whispering with urgent intensity. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the look, the handler's final command before the leash comes off. Later, I could almost hear her hiss, "It's time, Mark. Be the man of this house. Show her who's in charge." I watched my son's face. For a second I glimpsed the boy who loved his mother. But under Rachel's relentless pressure, his jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, an imitation of his father's confident stance. He was bracing himself. The writing had been on the wall, and I'd been too distracted by Christmas to read it. Margaret's silent disapproval and Rachel's whispered provocations were squeezing him until his conscience disappeared. Desperate to regain control, I clapped my hands lightly. "All right, everyone. Shall we sit? The turkey's ready." My forced cheer cut the tension but didn't break it. The staff moved to their stations. Sophie and Ethan drifted uncertainly to their chairs. Rachel gave Mark's arm one last squeeze, then released him with a knowing smirk. He was wound up and set loose. I walked toward my chair at the head of the table, the one I'd occupied for 40 years. Every step felt heavy. The fire crackled loud in the strained silence. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mark moving, not to his seat but straight toward me, his face a mask of grim resolve. The storm had arrived. After that, my memory is a tunnel of noise and color. The marble floor's icy shock seeping into my bones, the blurred faces of staff and grandchildren, the cold realization of what had happened. My son, my own son, had laid his hands on me. I didn't run. I walked up the grand staircase, each step a jolt of pain through my hip, head held high. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Their eyes followed me, shock, guilt, and I was sure, a thread of satisfaction. My bedroom was my sanctuary, soft creams and blues, lined with books and photographs from a life I thought I knew. I stepped inside and turned the heavy brass lock. The loud click was like a drawbridge rising, a fortress ceiling. For now I was safe. I leaned back against the door, eyes squeezed shut, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The dam of composure I'd built was cracking. A sob clawed up my throat. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare, a grotesque version of Christmas dinner. Any moment I'd wake up. But the throbbing in my hip was real. The image of my son's twisted face, real. A soft knock. Go away. I choked. Grandma. A trembling voice. It's me, Sophie. Please. My heart cracked again. My sweet, sensitive girl. She shouldn't be dragged into this ugliness. Yet I couldn't turn her away. I wiped the lone tear from my eye and unlocked the door. She stood pale in the hallway, tears streaking her cheeks, clutching her new phone like evidence. Grandma, I'm so sorry, she whispered. I just wanted a picture of the candles, and her words dissolved into sobs. I pulled her into my arms. Oh, sweetheart, this is not your fault. None of this is. She nodded against my shoulder, still trembling. After a moment she pulled back, holding out the phone. Her hands shook so badly the device blurred. I think you need to see this, she said. Go to your room, lock your door, I told her gently. I'll come soon. She hesitated, but then, seeing the new hard look in my eyes, nodded, squeezed my hand and hurried away. I locked the door again and sank into the wingback chair by the window. Outside, the Texas sky had gone dark, a blanket of indifferent velvet. For a long moment I just sat there, the phone heavy in my lap. Did I want to see it? Part of me wanted to smash it, to pretend this hadn't happened. Part of me wanted to make excuses for Mark. He'd snapped, he didn't mean it. But the part that had survived droughts, recessions, and fought beside George to build our life knew better. Sentiment was a luxury I couldn't afford. I pressed play. The video opened with laughter, Ethan's voice, my own bright and cheerful, the table glittering with candles and ornaments. Then the camera fixed on me at the head of the table. Watching was like an out-of-body blow. I saw Mark approach, his face a mask of false confidence, his words cold and rehearsed. My own expression, hurt and confused. Then the push. Worse than I remembered. Not a snap. Deliberate. Calculated. Violence. I watched my 72-year-old body stumble, arms flailing, the sickening thud as I hit marble. But it was the aftermath that froze my blood. Mark standing over me, not horrified but grimly justified. And behind him Rachel. Her mask slipped, revealing a smirk of pure triumph. She had won. In that instant something inside me broke. Not my spirit but the last fragile thread of denial. The pain didn't vanish but it hardened, cooling from raw grief into something sharp and powerful. Rage. Cold, clear and focused. I didn't cry. The tears evaporated, burned away by this new heat rising within me. The woman on the floor had been a victim. The woman watching was not. My gaze shifted from the phone to the silver-framed photo on my bedside table. George on our 40th anniversary, smiling, eyes crinkled with love, the bedrock of my life. I stared at his image, not in plea but in promise. They will not destroy what we built, George. I will not let them. My hand, trembling only moments before, was suddenly steady. Calm. Deliberate. I rose, crossed to the nightstand and picked up my phone. My fingers didn't falter as I found Charles Bennett's name. He answered on the second ring, warm with holiday cheer. Margaret, Merry Christmas. When I spoke, it wasn't the voice of a broken old woman. It was the voice he hadn't heard in years. The woman who once stared down bankers and union bosses without blinking. Charles, I said, precise and cold, I have the proof. Activate it. Christmas morning broke bright and cold over Austin. In Mark and Rachel's sterile mansion of glass and marble, a house that felt more like corporate headquarters than home, the mood was triumphant. They had done it. The coup was complete. I imagined them waking late, wrapped in luxury sheets, the previous night already reframed in their minds as a justified business decision. They were the future, I was the past. There was no rush of kids tearing into presents. Sophie and Ethan were with me. That fact probably relieved them. They could toast their victory in peace. In my mind's eye, I see them standing in that cavernous living room, champagne in hand, the enormous designer tree sparkling behind them. To the new era of Bennett construction, Rachel would declare smugly, clinking her glass. And to its new chairman. Mark would grin like a fool, proud at last, not realizing he was only a prince consort. Rachel wore the real crown. He probably expected his phone to explode with calls from me. Angry, tearful, desperate. That would have fed his ego. But the morning was silent. My name never lit his screen. Of course Rachel saw it first. She was glued to her phone, scrolling as always, when an email popped up while Mark admired the obscenely expensive watch she'd given him. Well, well, she murmured, smiling cruelly. He leaned over her shoulder. What is it? An email. From Charles Bennett's office. Sent at 6 a.m. Christmas morning. The language was cold, formal, and merciless. Subject. Formal notice of intent to enforce Clause 12B of the Bennett Family Trust and Holdings Agreement. Dear Mr. Bennett, as of 9 p.m. December 24th, a triggering event has occurred. Mrs. Margaret Bennett hereby exercises her right to purchase your full controlling interest, 51%, in Bennett Construction Incorporated. The purchase price as stipulated is fixed at $1. Formal transfer documents will follow. We advise you to secure legal counsel. Sincerely, Charles Bennett, Bennett and Associates. For a heartbeat, silence. Then laughter, loud, ugly, echoing off marble. Rachel threw her head back, gasping through her sneer. $1? She's finally lost her mind. Pathetic. Mark's laugh followed, weaker at first, then louder as he took his cue. She's bluffing. A scare tactic. She thinks this'll bring me crawling back. Rachel scoffed. It's nothing. The clause is probably unenforceable. Sentimental nonsense George dreamed up. It won't stand in court. But they didn't know what I held in my hands. They would have dissected that email, tearing it apart with the arrogance of people who think they're untouchable. Their entire logic rested on one fatal assumption. Let's be real, Mark would puff. Even if this clause was somehow enforceable, where would she get the money? Rachel would nod, swirling her champagne. Exactly. She's asset-rich but cash-poor. Everything she owns is tied up in the company you control. To buy you out, she'd need hundreds of millions in liquid capital to cover debts and operations. No bank would give her that loan without collateral, and we'd never approve it. Dead end. So sure of themselves, they laughed it off as the desperate gamble of a bitter old woman. They lived in a world of balance sheets and stock prices, blind to the kind of power that comes from loyalty, foresight, and love. They deleted the email, poured another glass of champagne, and celebrated, never realizing that quiet message was the sound of a guillotine sliding into place. While Mark and Rachel laughed in their glass palace, Margaret sat in her silk-paneled study, and she wasn't laughing. Rachel, smug in her triumph, had forwarded Charles Bennett's email to her mother with a flippant note. Can you believe the nerve? She's lost it. Margaret read it twice, her manicured fingers scrolling slowly. There was no amusement in her cold eyes. She knew George and she knew me. George might have been sentimental, but this clause wasn't sentiment. It was the ruthless foresight of a strategist. If it existed, it was airtight. And Margaret had studied me for years. She knew I wasn't prone to hysterics or empty threats. If I'd told Charles to activate it, I held a winning hand. The only question was, what proof did I have? The phrase provable and irrefutable public humiliation echoed in her mind. A witness? A recording? He didn't know. But my confidence was proof enough. Mark and Rachel had blundered badly. They'd mistaken a lioness for a house cat. And Margaret knew they were about to be mauled. She wasted no time. Emotion was weakness. Action was survival. Her first call was to her publicist, Michael. Darling, she said, her voice a mask of sorrow. Something terrible has happened. A private family matter has escalated. I need you to release a statement immediately. Within the hour, a carefully crafted statement appeared in the Austin Society pages and business outlets. Margaret Winters is profoundly saddened by recent reports of conflict within the Bennett family. She was not party to nor aware of the regrettable incident on Christmas Eve. Her only wish is for a swift and peaceful resolution. Her primary concern, as always, is the stability of Bennett Construction and the preservation of the legacy of its founder, the late George Bennett. It was brilliant. In a few sentences she cut herself free from Mark and Rachel, condemning their actions without ever naming them. She cast herself as the noble guardian of George's legacy while throwing her own daughter and son-in-law under the bus. The snake had shed its skin and her second act had already begun. Margaret didn't call lawyers. She called power. Her first call was to John Carmichael, a gruff old-school oilman who'd sat on the Bennett Construction Board with George for 3 decades. "John, it's Margaret," she said, her voice a perfect performance of crisis. "I'm afraid I'm calling with terrible news. You'll hear whispers soon, but I wanted you to hear it from me first." She laid out a carefully edited story. Mark, under pressure, had lost control and behaved appallingly toward her. In her emotional distress, she was making rash legal threats that could destabilize the company. "This isn't a family squabble anymore," she said solemnly. "It's a 5-alarm fire. Mark has proven too volatile to lead. And as much as I love Margaret," here she invoked herself in the third person like a confidant, "she's thinking with her heart, not her head. The company is about to be torn apart. Shareholders will panic." She let him absorb the disaster, then offered a calm solution. The board needed a neutral, steady hand to steer through the storm. Someone who respected George and could protect what he built. She would step forward as interim chairwoman until the crisis passed. She wasn't fighting for Mark and Rachel or for me. She was a third force emerging from the smoke, a shark moving in for the kill. The war for Bennett Construction was no longer a duel. It was a viper's nest. The 48 hours after Christmas were a brutal lesson in modern finance. As Rachel had smugly predicted, my plan hit a wall. I went to the banks, the same institutions where the Bennett name had been golden for 40 years, meeting bankers who'd called my husband a friend. They offered me coffee, condolences, and then turned me down flat. Mark had been busy poisoning the well, warning every lender that Bennett Construction was under a hostile takeover. He painted me as an unstable widow on a vendetta. Overnight I was a pariah. By the third day I sat in Charles Bennett's office, our grim reality settling over us. We had the law but no cash. "There's no one left to ask, Margaret," he said heavily. I stared at the steel and glass city below. He was wrong. There was one name left, so unthinkable I hadn't dared consider it until now. "Get me a meeting with Arthur Vance," I said quietly. Charles stared at me. "Arthur Vance? Are you out of your mind?" He was George's bitterest rival. They spent 30 years trying to destroy each other. "I know exactly who he is," I replied, my gaze steady. "And right now a shark is exactly what I need." Arthur Vance's mansion was the opposite of my home. Where the Bennett ranch was warm wood, worn leather, and memories, his was glass, white marble, and sharp edges filled with abstract art. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress built for strategy, not sentiment. He met me himself in a vast minimalist living room overlooking the city. At 75, Arthur was lean and sharp, his pale blue eyes missing nothing. We'd been social adversaries for decades but had always shared a grudging respect. He respected me far more than he ever respected my son. "Margaret," he said, skipping pleasantries. "To what do I owe this visit?" I didn't sit. "Let's cut to the chase, Arthur. You've heard the rumors." "I hear everything," he said, a faint, calculating smile at his lips. "My son has locked me out of my company. I have a legal mechanism to take it back, but he's blocked me at every bank in the state. I'm legally entitled to buy his shares but lack the capital to run the company after. I'm backed into a corner." He watched me, unreadable. Silence stretched. "I need your money, Arthur," I said, laying my cards on the table. "And you need the one thing you've never gotten. A door into Bennett Construction. A door only I can open." He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the city. He knew a deal of a lifetime when he saw it. Arthur was the only man in Texas with the resources, and the appetite, to challenge Mark. He turned back to me, his voice flat. 40%. I'll give you the credit line to operate and fund your legal fight to the end. In exchange, once you acquire your son's shares, 40% of Bennett Construction becomes mine. Non-negotiable. It was a devil's bargain. Nearly half the empire George and I had built, handed to our fiercest rival. But the alternative was worse. Letting Mark and Rachel destroy our legacy. I didn't hesitate. You have a deal. Our handshake was brisk, businesslike. An unholy alliance was born. I had sacrificed a piece of my kingdom, but I'd bought myself an army. The Bennett construction boardroom towered over Austin, all glass and mahogany designed to project power. I had chosen the decor years ago. That morning it felt foreign. The board sat grim-faced, summoned by Mark for an emergency meeting. At the head of the table, in the seats that once belonged to George and me, sat Mark and Rachel, polished, composed, confident. They believed this was their coronation, their chance to cast me out. They didn't realize they were walking into their own execution. The heavy oak doors opened. Silence fell. Heads turned. Faces shifted from wary anticipation to disbelief. Mark's jaw dropped. I walked in first, slow and deliberate, in a tailored navy suit, my expression serene. I was not the broken woman they expected. I was the matriarch of Bennett Construction, reclaiming my house. Behind me came Charles Bennett, briefcase in hand. And then Arthur Vance. Gasps rippled across the room. George's greatest rival strode in like he belonged there, followed by 3 razor-sharp lawyers moving with wolf-pack precision. At the far end sat Margaret, her mask calm but her eyes betraying shock. She hadn't anticipated this variable. Her plans had just been shattered. Mark was first to recover. He shot up, face blotchy red. What is the meaning of this? Mother, you're not welcome here. And him. He jabbed a finger at Arthur. This is a private board meeting. Security. The guard stepped forward, but Charles raised a hand. That won't be necessary. Mrs. Bennett is here as primary stakeholder of the Bennett Family Trust. And Mr. Vance is here as her financial counsel. Financial counsel? Rachel scoffed. Is this a joke? You have no standing here. We're moving to have you removed from the trust for incompetence. All in due time, Charles said smoothly. But first, the agenda item I submitted this morning, the enforcement of Clause 12b. Mark barked a laugh. Clause 12b is sentimental garbage. Non-binding. You have no grounds. This meeting is over. Get out. On the contrary, Charles said, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a slim laptop and a projector remote. The grounds are, unfortunately, quite solid. As you all know, Charles said to the stunned board, Clause 12b is triggered by an act of provable, irrefutable public humiliation of Mrs. Bennett by the acting CEO. We are here today to provide that proof. Tension gripped the room. Board members shifted uneasily. Mark and Rachel's confident facades cracked, a flicker of doubt showing through. This is ridiculous, Mark stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Charles didn't answer. He simply pointed the remote at the descending screen and pressed a button. The boardroom filled with the cheerful sounds of our decorated dining room, the glittering tree, the laughter. Some directors even relaxed. Just a family video. Then the camera found me. Found Mark. His voice rang out, that seat. Margaret will sit there tonight. They heard my gentle laugh, my attempt to brush it off. They heard his sharp reply, his anger. You're stuck in the past, Mother. This is my house now. I watched my son's face as his own cruelty echoed through the chamber. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him gray. Rachel's knuckles whitened against the table. At the far end, Margaret's mask slipped, shock and fury flashing in her eyes. Then came the moment. Mark's hand on my shoulder. The stumble. My 72-year-old body hitting marble with a sickening thud. A collective gasp filled the room. Good God, one board member muttered. And the final detail, the camera catching Rachel's triumphant smirk. 10 feet high on the screen, it was more damning than the fall itself. The intent was undeniable. Charles clicked the remote. The screen went black. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Mark sat slumped, his mouth open, his face bloodless. He looked like a man who had just watched his own soul die. I let the silence hang, making them all sit with the shame. Then slowly I rose. I pulled a crisp $1 bill from my jacket and walked the length of the table. My heels clicked softly, the only sound. I stopped beside Mark, who couldn't meet my eyes, and placed the dollar in front of him. According to the clause, I said, calm and steady, this company is now mine. The board stared, stunned. The only man unmoved was Arthur Vance, leaning back in his chair with a faint, satisfied smile. He hadn't come for a fight. He'd come to witness a masterpiece of strategy, and he wasn't disappointed. In the days after, an unnatural quiet settled over the Bennett ranch. The dust of battle had fallen, but the silence wasn't peace. It was the silence of a graveyard. Mark and Rachel returned once to collect their things on a gray, overcast afternoon. No confrontation, no words left to spend. They moved like ghosts through the halls. From the staircase landing I watched unseen. Mark was a hollow version of the sun I'd raised. Shoulders slumped, face gaunt, he avoided every glance as though even the furniture condemned him. He packed with mechanical movements, like a man who had lost everything and only now understood it. He had made his bed and now he had to lie in it. Rachel was different. Her silence carried no shame. Rachel's silence wasn't shame, it was rage. She packed with sharp, angry movements, slamming drawers shut like punctuation marks. She wasn't broken, just cornered, already plotting her next move. She never glanced back at the house she had schemed so hard to control. To her it was only a prize lost for now. Margaret was different. Practical as ever, she didn't bother with goodbyes. By the time the ink dried on the transfer documents, she was gone. No call, no note, just vanished, cutting her losses and moving on to the next game. After they were all gone, I walked through the quiet rooms of the ranch. The grand dining room was just a table now. The living room, once full of laughter, was just furniture. Victory felt hollow. I wasn't triumphant, I was tired. The taste of success was ash in my mouth. The next day Arthur Vance came to the ranch alone. We sat in George's study, Charles Bennett beside me as he laid out the ironclad papers transferring 40% of Bennett Construction to my husband's oldest rival. Arthur read through them with cold focus. "It's all in order," he said. "A deal's a deal," I replied, picking up George's gold pen, the one he'd used to sign the company into existence. My hand wavered for a heartbeat, then hardened. I signed. Arthur countersigned with his sharp script. It was done. He stood, gathering his papers. "You fought a good fight, Margaret," he said, his tone carrying rare respect. "George would have been proud of your strategy." "George would have hated that it came to this," I answered softly. He gave a curt nod and left. I sat staring at the empty chair, the weight of what I had done pressing down. I had won, but the cost was staggering. My son was gone, my family fractured, my company partly owned by a shark. Was this really what I wanted? Power, control? No. What I wanted was peace. And then I heard it, the thunder of small feet on the staircase. The study door burst open. Jacob launched himself at me, nearly knocking the wind out of me, Emily wrapping her arms around us both. "We saw the cars leave," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you okay?" I held them tight, breathing in their warmth, and for the first time in days felt something other than grief. "We're not going anywhere, Grandma," Jacob said fiercely. Tears spilled down my cheeks, not of anger but of relief. I had lost a son but not my family. My legacy was right here holding me. A year passed. I left the Bennett ranch behind. That gilded cage of ghosts was replaced by a small home on a quiet lake outside Austin. No endless halls, just cozy rooms filled with books. No manicured lawns, just a wild little garden. The silence here was alive, the water lapping, bees buzzing, a cardinal's song in the oak. One warm morning I was pruning roses when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I smiled, pulling off my gloves. Jacob, now 14, came bounding toward me, hugging me so hard he lifted me off the ground. Emily, 17, followed, graceful but smiling just as wide. "We brought you that mystery novel," she said, holding up a book. And Jacob ate half the cookies on the way. "Did not," he mumbled, already chewing another. Their weekend visits are the rhythm of my life now. Fishing off the dock, baking, board games, and long talks about their dreams. We never speak of that Christmas. We don't need to. We survived it, and the bond forged in that fire is stronger than steel. When Arthur later offered to buy the rest of my shares, I accepted. It wasn't just a sale, it was freedom. I kept only a small trust for Emily and Jacob, enough to keep them safe but not spoiled. I walked away from the empire George and I had built, and I've never regretted it. That afternoon, after lunch on the porch, Emily brought me the mail. The mail was the usual stack of bills and catalogs, but one thing stood out: a postcard. The front showed a sleek skyscraper in Shanghai. The handwriting on the back was sharp, angular, and instantly recognizable. "Margaret, heard you sold the rest of your shares. Smart move. You won. You know you always win. AV." I held it for a long moment, staring at Arthur's familiar script. He thought I'd won the war. The corporate fight, the battle for Bennett Construction. To him, life was wins and losses, conquests and deals. He would never understand the truth. My victory wasn't laying a dollar bill on the boardroom table. It wasn't bankrupting my son or outmaneuvering my enemies. My real victory is here. It's the sun warming my face, the sound of Jacob's laughter as he skips stones across the lake, the quiet pride in Emily's eyes as she talks about college. They tried to take everything, my home, my company, my dignity. They thought those things were the source of my strength. They thought power was ownership, a title, a number in a bank account. They were so busy fighting for a throne they never realized the real kingdom is carried in your heart. They lost the moment they forgot what it means to be family. I look up from the postcard to the sparkling water. Jacob is showing Emily how to skip stones and she's laughing, her head tipped back in the golden afternoon light. My heart feels full, not with hollow pride but with the quiet joy of belonging. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've been through something like this, share your story in the comments.